I have put a link to the agenda in the chat. We have a full agenda, so we'll get started. But one quick note about the survey. We've been providing a survey for every demo as a means to collect feedback on the things that we're showing, either that can be filled out during the demo or after the demo. We haven't had much success with this survey outside of the first one. We got good feedback in the first one, but after that, it's been pretty quiet. So we're giving it a go this one last time, but I wanted to make sure that you guys were aware that if we're not successful with this survey, again, this meeting, that it will go away, which is a little bit, you guys still hear me? Yeah, okay. I don't know what's going on. I can't really see you guys, but this was, like, we really want to hear from you guys, and so we were hopeful that this would be a good way of getting feedback. But if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. So I leave it to you guys. So the first thing up is, and we still don't have Matt Carrano, so I am going to jump to visuals. So Michael will be covering the visual work. And do we have SJ as well? No, we don't.
Matt Carrano just joined, Leslie.
Oh, okay. So we will jump back. Matt Carrano, you want to kick us off with Toolbar?
Yeah, let me get that up. So let me share out my screen. Over the past sprint, I've been working on gathering requirements and just wireframing out some concepts for the data toolbar. So this is the toolbar that appears on top of standard list table, card views, any place where we're showing a large data set. So the toolbar basically provides common data management functions that are useful for working with these data sets. So just this document that's linked here just outlines some requirements. You'll see some discussion on some of these requirements, but basic requirements include the need for filtering and different variety of different types of filters, sorting the data set, either alphabetical, numerical sorts, or ascending or descending sorts, global actions, find. We did have some interesting discussion on find and whether we actually need a find function as a standard component in PatternFly. We currently have it in PatternFly 3, but from the data I've collected, it seems like it's not really being used, and it also becomes kind of redundant with some of the built-in browser find capability. So right now we're considering that a candidate for deprecation, but certainly if any of you online have use cases where you use the current PatternFly 3 find capability, I would be interested in knowing more about how that's being used or applied. So feel free to reach out to me with that information. View switcher, bulk selection, which and pagination are all sort of basic components that we find in the toolbar. So we're not really looking at major changes here from what we have in PatternFly 3. Same basic layout. The visual team will do some further work on this to restyle this for PatternFly 4. We are looking at maybe a slight modification where we always keep the global actions on the right. Right now, the global actions move depending on whether we're using a view selector or not. So my feeling was keeping those actions in a consistent location and then adding any optional features like the view selector or the find, if we support that, to the left of those actions seem to make sense. And then some filtering options are outlined here. I think due to the complexity of filtering, and there's some comments that already came in about different filter use cases we need to support, we probably will pull filtering out into a separate story and do a deeper dive on that at a later date. So I think that's all that I want to say here about that. Any questions or comments? Okay, if not, I'll hand it back to you, Leslie.
Okay. We just keep going down the line. Michael with layouts.
Hey, okay. So I'm going to be sharing some work that Kyle Baker has done on layouts. And Kyle's out this week, so I'm going to be sharing it for him. I did some work around kind of organizing this and cleaning it up a little bit. So yeah, I'll get into it. Oh, and it's worth mentioning that this is still kind of in progress, and this is all based around the left-hand navigation. So layouts based around that. And we don't think this is quite ready for development yet, but we just wanted to give kind of a status update and show you where we're at, get you guys' thoughts. So starting off with a really basic layout here, basically we've got our left-hand nav and our top header area. These two are consistent elements in all of our layouts that you're going to see today. And then we've just got this empty gray content area. Something like this would be useful for, you can imagine like kind of just a series of cards, if you have a lot of cards, or just a page with like just a simple table or something. But where this gets interesting is when we add in this white division, horizontal division to the content area, and we kind of split that content area into two. And that can grow, and it's kind of dynamic based on the size or the needs of the content that's there. It can even be really big. And so really, you know, we're looking at having things like tabs here for our third level of navigation, things like page titles, you know, descriptions and stuff. And you can see here where I tried to put some content in this page. We've got basically divided up into two parts here with main title, description, and some metadata, and then a table view or a list view below that. So this just introduces a lot of flexibility. It really does seem to meet the needs of a lot of applications. So I'm actually going to show you guys at the end where I convert an existing application page using this layout. But to move on to the next one, we're also looking at using our overlay system to create even like further divisions of content, and primarily we're using this for detail views or dashboards. So you'll see a lot of charts and more information-based content in this overlaid area here. And you can also see we're dividing up this. We have this big content area underneath. In this case, I've got just a big white rectangle in there, but you'll see later that that could be divided up as well. So just like the white content area before, on the more basic layout, this can expand as well and be dynamic. It can also be divided up into two parts. So for more complex layouts, this. Here's an example of splitting up that content area underneath. So really just showing there's a lot of flexibility here with these layouts. Multiple columns of content or just one column. We think it all works really well. And then, like I said, we're still kind of working on this, and we're getting pretty experimental with things. So this is just one example of a lot. We're really trying to exhaust all our options here. What if we have a right panel, a gray panel on the right there, and it kind of having that dashboard content in the middle and having like 3 levels of overlay? How does that work and how does that look? So we're really trying to exhaust all of our options here. And then finally, an example of how that might look with some content. In this case, this is the dashboard layout that has the division between the in the overlay area. And then the beginnings of some chart work. I still have a lot of work to do on the charts, and this is in no way indicative of final chart design, but I was keeping that work in mind when I was doing this. So I think it all works out pretty well here. And then finally, I wanted to convert. Matt Carrano found us a lot of great product pages or application pages from our products. And I thought this one was really interesting because there's a lot going on. We've got like 3 levels of content up, or sorry, 3 levels of navigation up here. There's a table at the bottom, and then above that is just this kind of like smorgasbord of really a lot going on, just a kind of crazy hierarchy of content here. And you can see just by applying this to our layout, that horizontal division, I think, helps split the content really well. And just applying our general styling too, I think this is a good example of how it really cleans things up. I didn't even really change the layout of the content here at all. Just looking at applying our styles and our type system and all that, really the only thing I changed was converting the top 3 levels of horizontal nav to our left-hand nav. And then, like I mentioned before, you can see here how we're using this top white content area for tabs of a third layer of navigation. And then also just foreshadowing some of the great tables work that SJ has done, and looking at some of our form elements too. So overall, I think it's a really big improvement. And like I said, this isn't even considering rearranging this content into a more, a less crazy layout. So that's pretty much it. Thank you guys. If you guys have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them. But like I said, Kyle was mainly doing this work, but I will answer them to the best of my ability.
Questions? All right. Now we'll keep trucking with SJ and the hybrid list view.
Perfect. I'll share my screen. All right. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I worked on the visuals for the list view, and I just wanted to note up front that this is still a work in progress, but I just wanted to show an update of the work that's been put into the visuals. So the list view for PatternFly 4 has 3 parts. There's the traditional list view that we use in PatternFly now, which is what I'm showing now. There's the hybrid table list view, and then there's another table option. So I'll go through all 3. The first part is just the traditional list view. And the main thing to point out about this is that this is a more flexible option. So the content for each row is divided into 2 columns. So you can see at the top here, the spec level, there's the left column and the right column. And we really just want the user to use this for maximum flexibility and to avoid having content that shows multiple columns within a column. So here's an example. This filter toolbar at the top is a placeholder. I know Matt is working on UX for it now. So that's just there. And I did have an example of it in context. So I used one of the layouts that Kyle and Michael just showed, just so you get an idea of how it would appear on a page. So in addition to this list view, we also started working on responsive list view as well. So the responsive list view is a little more straightforward than the hybrid. So we have the two columns, and it'll just wrap within a row when it goes responsive. Here's an example here. I met with Matt Carleton yesterday. The one tricky thing here to note is just the kebab menu on the top, since it is wrapping traditionally. I mean, the kebab menu would be on the bottom right, and that's not really standard for this. So I'm proposing to have it on the top right of each row. So TBD on that, but hopefully that could be implemented. And next is the hybrid list view. So the hybrid list view, is more a table. It's a table view that is formatted similar to a list. So the main difference here is that it has the visuals of a list view, but it has columns from a table. So you can utilize more rows and put more content, or utilize more columns and put more content in each row. Here's an example. One thing that might change are the column headers. I initially had them as gray text, but it did not pass accessibility. So still playing around with this. Obviously this one still works, but the black text works. But I want to meet with Kyle when he returns and get his feedback as well. I also mocked up the expanded view. So Michael had worked on this a while back. We utilize this blue line for an expanded row, and then we use a shadow too, so it pops off the page more and differentiates it from the rest of the table. Again, use it in context. Now, where it gets fun is the responsive view for hybrid. So this one is definitely still a work in progress. Probably proposing some crazy things. But for the first pass, one thing to note is that for each row, we're adding 8 pixels of space just because it could get so busy and we need to differentiate the row. If you look back in the responsive state for list view, it's just a line separating each row of data. That did not work visually for the responsive state of hybrid. And the main part call out, so each column has their column header, which is transformed into a line of text within the responsive. And the big thing is on tables that utilize a select option. I'm playing around with it, but if we could keep it on the top left, and then again with the kebab on the top right, which does not translate from traditional horizontal view of the hybrid list. So again, still playing around with it. And I'm sure we'll probably have to do a technical feasibility on this once I get a more final visual design. And lastly is an option for the table view. So we're proposing the hybrid as the recommended table to use for PatternFly 4. But again, we're going back to the traditional, and this will just be an option for users to use. So this is very similar to what we have now in PatternFly 3. We're utilizing the lines. There's less space or padding on each row. And recommending to not use the stripe columns, so like the white, gray rows, just to keep it less busy, and it doesn't work that well with accessibility with the buttons or the action buttons. Blue on the gray is a little iffy, and what else? And here it is in context. I knew that was a lot. Again, still work in progress, hoping by next demo we'll have this all more fleshed out. But yeah, any questions?
Hey, SJ, I've got a question. Can you speak to, on the toolbar, I guess you guys call it a kebab, on the alignment with the buttons? Like, why is that left aligned and then down on the table? Like, my eyes keep wanting to pull that kebab over to the right to line it with the table. I'm sure there's a reason why you guys are doing it. I'd just like to understand.
So this is just placeholder. This was the first pass in the toolbar, but now I know Matt Carrano is actually working on the UX for it. So this will definitely get updated to reflect the work he's done. So I know he just showed that the primary actions were right aligned.
Yeah, I think, Jen, I think that's a great catch. And I think this is one of the reasons why we'd like to consistently pull those actions, those global actions in the toolbar to the right. So that's something that will, in PatternFly 3, they kind of moved around in different configurations, but having them consistently on the right, I think is a good, we'll address that.
Thank you.
Welcome. Any other questions?
Great, thanks, SJ. We'll move on to the CSS portion. We have Matt Carleton kicking us off with a couple of stories of input group, as well as updating the form.
Hey guys, okay, let me share my screen. So yeah, like Leslie had said, I worked on finalizing the input group and just updating the form components. So take a look at the input group here. You can see here, it's basically what you'd expect an input group to be. So it's just a bunch of different variations of different things that we're including in that. This is still an open PR, so definitely feel free to go in and make any comments or take a look at it if you want. But it's getting pretty close to being merged. And when that does get merged, I'm going to go back to the form component and pull that into just to show it within the context of the form. But if we take a look at the form component, this was mostly what Matt Nolting had done. So what I was doing was just updating it to pull in the new form control component and the checkbox radio button component, and then the input group as well. So what you're seeing is just a blank screen, which is super exciting. But I'm not sure why this is not loading. There we go. Yeah, so it actually, for the most part, looks identical to what it did. It's just mostly work done within the handlebars, making changes there to pull in the different components that were created. That's it. Any questions? Great, thanks.
All right, Matt Nolting.
So I have a couple things to share. First, so the first is not that, the toolbar layout. Generic toolbar layout consists of toolbar groups, then toolbar items, and then toolbar sections. And the toolbar groups align themselves automatically to the left, and sibling toolbar groups have a large spacer at left, and then the items have smaller spaces. Sibling items within those groups have smaller spaces, which look like this. Pretty simple. And there's also an option to align right. So we were just talking about that quite a bit. So very simple, real lightweight. It's as responsive as it can be in this kind of generic layout. So when you reduce the viewport width, oops, items wrap as you would expect them to. And this is an example of two different sections wherein you know that when you have a narrower viewport and you're using flex, things can get kind of out of control. So if you segregate those two areas, you can control them better. That's the toolbar. And then the next on the list is the modal box. And this is an example of the modal box with pretty much everything that was updated. The first thing that was updated was adding spacing around the box itself for narrower viewports. We also added in a close button to the component, as well as specific title styling. And now the footer will handle buttons when they're dropped in and align those right and space them properly. And this is an example of, we ran into an issue where if there was a combination of too much, probably too much from a UX perspective, title text, and not enough vertical space, the title was kind of forcing the content, which scrolls, to behave oddly. So as you can see, we reduced the viewport height. We're truncating that text. We're actually using a line clamp here and then truncating the text here, so that there's at least some usable space there. This is this is going to be uncommon when somebody's obviously browser windows is this size, but it still handles the cases when possibly the title is when the title is just too long, which could happen. What else do we do? Also updated the accessibility documentation for this to kind of expand on where we're using ARIA attributes. And I think that's it. Does anybody have any questions about the modal? Nope. Okay.
Thanks, Matt.
And then there's one more. There's one more.
I was going to ask a question about the close icon. Is that just the standard like PF-M-action like sizing and everything?
Yeah, there was a lot of conversation about the close button itself and how we wanted the text in the case that there was a header and also not a header present, how we wanted that to flow. And so we just wrapped a PF-M action button in close, right? Now it's its own part of the component. You just wrap it in close and it positions itself as it should.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now it's not dependent on the header or the body really being there. It's outside of those things. So it's just a part of the modal box itself now.
That's good.
Meaning it's a sibling, to clarify, meaning it's a sibling of header, body, and footer.
Cool.
Okay?
That makes sense.
Yeah, we talked about that a lot. I think we may talk about that some more, I'm not sure. And then there is the about modal, which Sarah Rombach built almost all of. And I just kind of came in and tried to debug some of the few issues we had with it. It does some really interesting things. This is a really good example of how you can use grid to lay things out, because it goes from a single column to two columns, and the content scrolls. And then you can break the logo out into the second column, which is probably doesn't look that complex, but it's a pretty powerful feature of grid. So what I did here was I just tweaked the max width and max height so that there's a little bit of spacing around those at the large viewport size, and updated the button And I think that's it. It was really mostly all Sarah's work. So, any questions there?
All right, thanks, Matt. Next, we have John and Taufique on tooltip and popover. We have, yep, okay.
All right, cool. Can y'all see my screen?
Yep.
Hello?
We sure can.
Oh, okay, cool. Sweet. So yeah, I have a PR up right now for the tooltip and popover components. I got a lot of help from the team, starting with Andres, like kind of guiding me through the development process for like building a component and using the CLI and basically just how everything's laid out. And then a lot of people just kind of helping me as I was going to make sure things were like in style of framework. So thank you to everyone for all the help and being holding. So yeah, the basic component they're very similar. The tooltip and the popover. The popover just has a close button similar to what Matt was showing on the Modal, and then like a header and body text, and then the tooltip just has the body text. And the actual like UX of like showing and hiding and anything like that would be done like outside of the core framework, similar to Dropdown. The tooltip and popover like are always displayed as open, and it's basically just like the positioning of the element on its parent. And so if we look at the way that's set up, we have a parent. The handlebar the parent is wrapped by the tooltip component itself, and then the container element has arrow and content children elements, and that's sort of like the container is like the overall tooltip, and then content is the square, and then the arrow is arrow, and so you have modifiers for displaying on the right, bottom, left, and top, and then I'm trying to think if there's much else. Yeah, that's pretty simple. I had some help with Dana with making it so that you can use an inline partial if you're using handlebars to like pass any other either handlebars or HTML into the parent, so that like you could test things out using the handlebars layout. So oh, and one more thing to show, the way that the way it works is there's a max or there's like a width for the container element that will sort of stretch, and right now it's set to stretch to max 200 pixels, so that when things get really long, they wrap at that length, but if they're really short, they shrink to the available space. And so, and that number can be adjusted and stuff. It without doing that, it would just like wrap like at like 100 pixels or something. Like it would be like one word and then the next word and then the next word, and it just looked weird. So that was a way to kind of be able to handle that. And then, yep, I think that's it for the basic styles. Similarly, this uses the same sort of padding that the mock-up given by SJ showed, and then oh yeah, the shadow we're still sort of working on. Basically, like it using box shadow is complicated because of the edge that isn't straight. And so I started by using drop shadow, which just sort of like wraps whatever the edge is, even if it's like something that's not straight. And then there was an issue with that because the box shadow that we were using for this, based on the specs, has like two different like shades, like a closer and then a farther away. And then drop shadow only allows you to pass like one like shadow. So I'm working with Matt Carleton to figure out a way to use like pseudo elements to like put the box shadow around this. And we had gotten pretty close. The only issue was that based on the way that the overall container like sort of takes up more space, it was like causing the shadow to like come out to there instead of wrap to the content area. But yeah, we'll figure that out. And yeah, and there's a few more things that I mentioned in the PR that I'm kind of working on to get this in. One of which is fixing the X to be standard with the way that Modal works. That was something someone mentioned, and so I'm going to talk with you, Matt, and figure that out. Then Taufique, you wanted to talk about some of the design stuff as it relates to, yeah.
Yeah, so specifically just the tooltip itself, for our use case, we thought that we wanted to introduce some variables to make the smaller padding shift from 32 from the spec to 16, because if you see the tooltips on 32, you see that the ratio to the button itself is pretty big, and we're really hurting for space in towers, so we wanted to provide a variable so we could use not only a smaller padding, but also we wanted to have a dark background one as well, which John will show. So I just want to get feedback on the idea of having these variables.
Yeah, and it uses the modifier, the class-based modifier that I talked with Andres about for, yeah, like the BIM convention values.
I did have a question on that, the inverted. Is there a reason, because I know that there's different themes now as well, was there a reason not to use the theme instead of making a new modifier that's specific to this?
So I actually forgot to mention this. The specification indicated that the tooltip, similar to alert, is one of the elements that is always white. It even on like a dark theme or whatever. And so yeah, I basically the inverted it just like takes the colors that were given and kind of just updates it. So yeah, that's one of the things that I was talking about with Andres, and I haven't synced up with him since he got back from vacation to make sure that this makes sense. But he mentioned that one way that we could do this is by having something like a AT, like so Ansible Tower C component that like sort of wraps these sorts of updates to the variables, or we could use a modifier and kind of have it within the core framework itself, which has the benefit of like anyone who kind of comes across this could get like an in-style kind of system, I guess, or an in-style with the design system way of doing these types of things. But yeah, and that's using both the compressed and inverted model.
All right, thank you, John. I hate to cut you off, but we definitely have a lot more. So definitely, as Taufique said, if you have feedback, feel free to add that to the chat or in the survey. It's regarding next steps for the tooltip. This PR, I believe, is open right now, John, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
But one of the goals of PatternFly is to provide consistency across these different applications. So what we're doing is marking this or flagging this for something to look at potentially in a larger research plan regarding the spacing and sizing of this, and to get some user feedback and data on that to see what concerns there might be with that, as well as just seeing this in the context of a larger example. PatternFly 4, I think, is helpful. So more work to come with that. And yeah, definitely thank you, John and Taufique, for contributing. So next up is accessibility. Jenn has an update there.
Hey, so in the accessibility guide, this is a really quick update in the checklist for what PatternFly should address. There's an item describing the target area for clickable elements to have a minimum size of 32 by 32 pixels. I included the WCAG item, which it's a AAA item, which our goal is not to meet AAA, it's to meet AA. I included it just as a reference. Their size is 44 by 44 pixels, which is much larger than what we are defining for PatternFly. But I included this footnote here to try to help clarify that this is not our guideline or a guideline that we're trying to meet. It's just there for reference only. But if you have any comments or questions on this item, the PR is still open for this update. So feel free to post comments there. And that's it. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jenn. We'll move on to React. We have a number of component work that's been happening in that space. So Doug will start us off. We can't hear you, Doug, if you are talking.
Realize I was muted. Okay. So a few demos, I guess. They'll be pretty short, just kind of to show that they exist. First one being the card. So we have that implemented. It's got the header, a body, and a footer. Each of these are different React components. And then as well as them being defaulted to, so the card itself will default to article. You can also pass in other elements that you would like for it to be. This is going to support a lot of the other scenarios we have from accessibility concerns. So that's kind of one thing that it supports. Otherwise, it's just kind of a basic component. The next one is icons. So I pulled over all the icons that were from core, that are in core in the Font Awesome icons. So to support this, we had to write a script to remove all of the Font Awesome imports out of the CSS that core delivers to us. So once we remove that, then we can actually generate these React components from the SVGs that Font Awesome actually gives us or has a package for. So we take those and generate React components from those. So now we don't have any Font Awesome stuff that people need to import. You can actually code split these icons out so that you're not, downloading all the SVGs of your application from the get-go. So that was one kind of big benefit. They're easy to use and import, and these are just the ones we have now. We can add them more. They're actually in their own package at PatternFly/React-icons, just to keep the core lightweight. So that's it for the icons. Gallery layout, another really simple one. Just gallery and items. It's got gutter sizes, which I know are coming. Currently, there's just a single gutter size, but once other ones are added in, we will actually start to see the gutter sizes there as well. And then the last one, this is up in pull request right now, is grid. So this is kind of just simple grids taken directly pretty much from core. One thing that I did add just for React folks is a grid kind of playground, so you can mess with these, kind of build your own grid from there, and then we could potentially generate source code for this as well to make it easier for users to kind of build their own grids and then export that to an application a little bit easier. So this one's in pull request, and I actually think the card one's in pull request too. Gallery and icons are actually in now as well. And that is all I had.
All right, thanks, Doug. Next up, we have Karel. We cannot hear you, Karel. I had to switch over to make sure your mouth was moving, and it was. You don't look like you're on mute, but I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Here you go. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. I've been working on
Oh, you are really muffled. Not like you're talking underwater.
I've been trying to move different months to from the PatternFly 41 to the
Karel, sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you sound really muffled. Is everyone else hearing that?
I'm hearing the same.
Oh, can't hear you. Well, let's maybe we'll skip over to the next thing. We'll give you a few minutes to try to work on your audio. We'll come back to you. Sorry about that, Karel. So next would be, oh, lost my track. Okay, so I do have a link here to a blog post, go into depth about it, but I did want to just make you aware that we have this up. I also put it in the chat regarding PatternFly 4 and what does this mean for our existing users. It highlights some of the efforts that are currently going on or currently planned in order to address migration and any inconsistencies that PatternFly 3 and PatternFly 4 introduce. The next thing is that there's a number of PatternFly 3 things going on. We'll start. Matt, did you want to cover the message dialogues?
Sure. So one of the things we have added in the past couple of weeks, it's new, is a new pattern on message dialogues, and that's located in the communication section on the website. So this is just providing some basic guidance around creating standard message dialogues. So we have so two variants on this: a message dialogue with and without an icon, and basic elements are a title, some type of primary message, which is optional, and then the body of the message, and then action buttons aligned to the lower right. And this is fairly general, so we didn't want to get into, obviously there are many specific use cases we can get into on different types of dialogues that you may need to generate, but we kind of boiled this down to three major classes of dialogues. The confirmation dialogues, which come up as in response to a user-generated action. And guidelines on constructing a confirmation dialog. There are dialogs which are for system-generated, feeding back that there's an error condition, and then finally, what we're calling a passive dialog is basically again, a system-generated dialog that is just providing some information that is not necessarily critical in nature, but is being presented to the user from the system. So again, this pattern will provide some guidance for designers in creating the various types of dialogues. And I just wanted to also acknowledge Melody Zhang in the Beijing team, and Stacy McAuliffe here in Boston. I give them credit for doing the lion's share of the work on getting this new pattern together. That's it. Any questions? Okay. Back to you.
Great,
Leslie.
thanks, Matt. So the other, the other items listed in here, I just wanted to highlight some bug fixes that have come down the line for our merged rest. These are closed. And then we did have a couple of feature development items. So the inline edit for Listview, that was both contributed, and you can also now see that example on our website, as well as the date for the add range. It was added as well as updated on our site as well. All right, with the last few remaining minutes, Carl, do we have any better luck with you? No. So maybe, Doug, do you want to cover it for Carl since we can't hear the alert and the level layout?
Sure. Yeah.
Thanks, Doug.
Let me pull up the links. Actually, yeah, got them here.
Blue Jeans never fails us. Letting us down some way.
Yes. Don't know that he's got. Don't think it ever got the. There's the alert one. That one's the important one. Okay, so this is a PR that I've been pretty active in, so I at least know kind of what's going on here. We've got the alert component here Karel's been working on, and it's got kind of the same demos that Core has. Each of these, the success, danger, warning, and notification or info. With that, we're actually using the SVGs from the PatternFly React icons package. So that's a dependency of PatternFly React 4. Once that's pulled in, we'll do a named import of each of the icons, and then at build time, we've got a Babel plugin that will inline those imports so they're direct imports. What this will offer, again, and this is kind of a theme that we'll be hearing a lot about with React, is that this is going to allow code splitting out of the box for users. There will be no weird complex setup to support code splitting or tree shaking, any of that. It'll just kind of work. So even if a user only uses success icons or success alerts and no other icons in their application, they're not going to pull in all of the icons, just the success ones. And so I think that'll be important going forward for keeping bundle sizes small. As well with this, we've kind of got the same prop kind of pattern that we've got for most of the buttons and et cetera. We're using variant to decide, success, danger, warning, info, and then button has primary, secondary, et cetera. And that'll determine what modifier gets kind of thrown on there at the top level or some of the bottom levels as well. Along with that, it kind of drives the screen reader only stuff, which is not quite in yet. We're still just kind of working through that. And then the ARIA labels as well. So we default to what Core is providing, but we also allow people to pass in their own. And this is something that we're going to have to support going forward to support translation, unless we only want to do accessibility in English. And so this is something that we'll need to allow users to pass in, just so that we can get that configuration. And I think that's it for alerts. And then the level layout has a PR open. Unfortunately, the Netlify deploy stuff with PatternFly React is having issues with Learnus, so we've kind of had to manually do this, and I missed this PR. So unfortunately, you get to look at some code here, but the level layout looks exactly like the one from Core. It's going to have very similar prop structure to all the other layouts where we've kind of got small, medium, large gutter sizes so that we can support in the future the small, medium, large gutter sizes that are coming from Core. Right now, we just default to the basic gutter size that we get from Core. So it still works like Core, and we'll get those for free as it goes. And then this is the generated CSS for each of those kind of gutters right now. Again, like we mentioned, there's only one gutter size. But once this changes, if we update these snapshots, will update and we'll get notified of the style changes from Core. So we'll be able to take advantage of those. And then here's the docs. And that's it.
All right, thanks, Doug, and thanks, Carl, again, for this contribution. So we are close to the top of the hour, so if there's any feedback, please reach out to us on Slack. There's the survey to give us feedback on these specific demos, or of course we have our PRs that are open and issues on GitHub. Thank you so much for joining, and I'll send out the recording, and we'll see you next time. Bye.